So, hello, everybody. This is Dr. Jamie Marich with the Institute for Creative Mindfulness, and I'm so happy to be joined today by one of my very dear friends, Malika Rajan, who is in Delhi as we speak. Welcome, Malika.
Thanks for having me.
So, Malika and I did yoga teacher training together here in the US. And as we'll learn about Malika, she was brought up in India, lived for 22 years in the US, and then moved back to India. So, I'm very, very excited to be getting her perspectives on this whole idea of what it means to share yoga practice, to teach yoga practice, especially here in the West. Are we doing Indians a disservice, a dishonor? We're just going to talk about everything connected to that and appropriation
Perfect.
and sharing. So, Malika, I first want to say namaste.
Namaste.
So, let's start there.
Okay.
What does it feel like to you as a person from India when you hear white people say namaste like that?
I feel in some ways I've also been acclimatized to the
Okay.
Western way of Namaste, but let me share my first experience because that will shed some light of how I saw it back then. So, about 20 years ago, I went for my first yoga class in the US. I mean, I'd been doing yoga in India, but I decided it was time to get back and do something. So, I went to a typical studio, lots of people wearing lots of tight clothes and doing yoga. And so I joined the class, I followed along. And at the end of the class, everybody, including the teacher, suddenly started bowing to each other very slowly and saying, Namaste. And I started smiling, and I thought, everybody in the class would start laughing. Um, and no one was laughing. So then I was like, what am I missing here? Because in India, typically namaste is like a colloquial greeting. I mean, that's what it has become.
Right.
I'm sure it has a much stronger root, much rich foundation. But over the years, and I'm talking over many thousands of years, it's become a very colloquial greeting, sometimes formal, but mostly if you're meeting a stranger, you just say namaste. And it's definitely not namaste. So it was interesting for me to see that. And then it was like for me in my mind, it was like as if a bunch of people are going, hello. So if you can imagine how that would sound to you the first time, that's how it sounded to me. But I think now, having spent about 20 years in the US, I've kind of gotten used to the essence behind what people are trying to say, what they're trying to, you know, adopt some of the cultures. Um, it's not as jarring for me anymore.
Right. And I think we could start there with the question, is it appropriate, let's say in a Western yoga class, for that greeting to be used? Let's start there.
It's if I say yes or no, it sounds like a judgment because it's almost as if what is the intention behind it?
Yes.
If the intention is really to bring on a practice where you can drop into the moment
Hmm.
and you're doing it with all of your heart, I think it's completely appropriate.
Yes.
But if it's been done just to fit in without any essence, like in India, we say the word bhav, which means for yogic, it means attitude.
Right.
If the attitude is off bringing you into that space and connecting you with one another, why not? But if it's done just to fit in, even then, why not if it's going to eventually bring you to where it needs to go?
Hmm. One, thank you. And I think this whole idea of intention is going to be a theme of the interview as we talk about a
Hmm.
lot of these issues that I really think are important for Western yoga practitioners, Western yoga teachers to hear. So what are your, feelings? And I think the answer may, be based in this whole intention idea again. Like when you see how a lot of the word namaste has been kind of marketed or appropriated, like, the whole namaste in bed, or just
Oh,
how,
I didn't realize there was a namaste in bed.
yeah, like there's a popular t-shirt that's out there, like, namaste in bed, or like, a relative gave me a little coffee mug that says, like, namaste with the cat doing this. And part of it is I like in that I believe her intention in sending me the mug was she knows I like yoga and practice yoga, and it was a gesture of I want to show Jamie I understand her. And I actually found the gift very sweet. But then a lot of other merchandise and marketing is like, namaste, namaste, MFers, all of this. So I don't know, just anything on how the word has been kind of appropriated in the West.
I think for me, I don't know, it just makes me laugh
Okay.
because it's almost like, are we running out of creative ideas that we just have to stick to one word and butcher it to no end? Um, I think for me, it's also funny because growing up, we didn't really think about mats or yoga clothes.
Mm,
We just thought about like loose clothing where you can
yes.
breathe and you can move freely. That was the only criteria. And that still is the only criteria when you're doing authentic trainings. Basically, they will say have loose clothing where you can breathe and have loose clothing where you can move. So a lot of people wear kurta pajamas.
Right.
And now mats have all sorts of designs and all sorts of things. So as an individual, you have to decide what works for you.
Hmm.
Are you adding to the commercialization? If it works for you, why not?
Hmm.
But if you're just, sometimes people do it as part of their fad that we're joining the culture of yoga, but then they go home and they've forgotten all the teachings.
Right.
So I think it's better to forget the merchandise and stick to the teachings if it's possible. But if the merchandise is going to bring you one step closer, then for some people that can also be a stepping stone.
Yes. So let's dive in because there's just so many
Okay.
things I've been wanting to pick your brain about. The first thing is it's interesting you brought up yoga mats because you and I both know it is largely a Western invention, the sticky
Yeah.
yoga. And there's an interesting story behind all of that. But I think a lot of Americans or people in the West think that everybody in India practices yoga. Everybody in India is walking around with a yoga mat. And so I'd like you to just kind of set the record straight on what role did yoga play in your consciousness just as a young Indian woman growing up?
So it is around you when you are living in India, whether you like it or not. You hear about it, you have teachers who are teaching it. I had more exposure to yoga in the US.
Hmm.
Like growing up in India, there was yoga in school. So we're practicing in large halls with large number of people. Um, but it didn't have the element of like fantasy and how do I put it? It doesn't have this theatrical approach like it has in the US.
Right.
In India, it's very like, here are the steps, here are what you do, and you just do it.
Hmm.
Whereas in the US, I feel they've made a whole sequence out of it. Like you start and then there's a flow and in some ways that keeps your interest also because in India sometimes it can also be very rigid.
Hmm.
For me personally, growing up, I saw it around me. It wasn't as big a part of my household as it has been in some of like my other family members' households. But when we think about yoga, it's not just yoga, as in the asana practice, the posture
Yes.
practice. It's also things like in the mornings, people would get up and do havan in their house, fire ceremonies.
Hmm.
And, they do have a pranayam or a breath practice. So, in some ways, it was part of the lifestyle,
Hmm.
especially a lot of my cousins, had this as part of their practice. Um, Having said that, I got more interested in it once I came to the US.
Hmm.
So I do commend the efforts of the Western world to bring it out so that it is available to a lot of people. Like I grew up more in a modern culture in India.
Hmm.
So it was something that became more accessible to me when I was in the US. See, when I came to the US, I basically came to study, I came to do a job, and eventually, I reached the point like every typical midlife crisis person reaches of, you're coming to the fork and you don't know which way to go. And fortunately for me, I happened to type in the word yoga in Google and it brought me to the Kripalu Center. And my journey really began there. in the US. I mean, I'd taken classes before, but I'd never explored it, what it meant for me as a human being.
Mhm.
And from there, I took trainings. I then moved to the Amrit Yoga Institute, where I took more trainings and I even lived there. And what I realized is was at every training I took, I learned a little bit more about myself. I learned a little bit more about what yoga is. And when you dive deep into that journey, the commercialization automatically starts dropping away.
Mm.
I personally was never attracted to it anyways because most of the Lululemon clothes never fit me. So I didn't have a desire to join that game. But what I realized is even if for another individual, even if you're attracted to the whole lifestyle, the whole perception of the lifestyle, and it brings you into the journey, eventually what keeps you there is the desire to seek yourself. Now, the thing is, in India, when they teach yoga, and I'm actually in the midst of a teacher training here in India right now, so I can tell you the differences. It is quite different because here they do a lot of the concepts from the old Upanishads, old scriptures, and they don't, in the Western world, it's the language has been changed a lot to adapt to the modern applications. Whereas in India, they're still teaching the very authentic teachings,
Mhm.
and oftentimes it's very difficult to understand what they're even talking about without a background.
Yeah.
Now for me this training is, it seems a lot easier, it seems a lot more approachable, a lot more accessible to me right now because of the foundation I've received in the West.
Mm.
So that's why I feel, in any subject, in any area that you look at, there will always be the authentic and there will always be the commercial aspect.
Mhm.
And it really doesn't matter if the two are coexisting. What matters is that who is the seeker and what are they more attracted to and how long can they stay attracted to each of those.
Mhm.
So really, the commercial pull, it's not so bad if it brings someone into the practice.
Right.
And if it's so strong that it doesn't bring someone into the authentic practice, then it's also weeding out the people who aren't really interested.
Okay. Okay.
So really, everything is serving its own purpose. And yeah.
Yeah, so somewhere in there, I heard you use the word adaptation. And I think
Mhm.
that's what we, especially who do a lot of trauma work in the West, are really highlighting. That if we were to go in with our clients and teach a lot of these practices, maybe as they're taught in India.
It would be tough.
Yes. So
I'll give you an example.
please.
So, in the training we're doing right now, and I will tell you this as someone who has also been through, who also has had complex trauma and probably still has traces of it, I can appreciate this greatly that the role of adaptation is very, very, very important because it can be very triggering. And I can say for myself personally, if I had been listening to these teachings 3 or 4 years ago, even, it would have been very triggering for me.
Mhm.
So I'll give you a simple example. There is a concept called Pratipaksh Bhav. And the basic essence of that teaching is it basically guides you to do this. If a negative thought comes into your mind, you are asked to replace it immediately with a positive thought. Now, it sounds really simple and it sounds I wouldn't say intuitive, at least not for me. But basically, the teaching is telling you immediately replace a negative thought with a positive thought. Now, someone who is not aware of their trauma can probably do it.
Mhm.
Someone who doesn't have excess trauma can also probably do it. But once you're aware of your trauma and once you're aware that you have a lot of struggles, that's not an easy thing to do because then things like what about suppression, what about dismissive behavior, where does that all play a role in all of this?
Mhm.
On the other hand, I understand the meaning of the teaching today as someone who has actually gone through a lot of the healing myself,
Mhm.
who can see that, yes, what these teachings are basically giving you a direction. They're giving you something to look forward to. It's like showing you the end of a movie, but it's not revealing the process. The process is the healing. It's showing you the end of the movie. So it's something to look forward to. But if you haven't been through your own healing journey, it's not accessible.
Yeah.
So for me, there is no substitute for the process. There is no substitute for what someone who is struggling with, giving them the due time, the necessary healing that they need to get to that place. And then you can shed light on this teaching where you can give them something to look forward to. Today, I'm in a place where that is actually possible for me,
Mm-hmm.
where if I have a negative thought, I actually have been able to reach a point where I'm capable of replacing it with a positive thought. Before, I used to be so stuck in my triggers that even thinking about a positive thought was even more triggering,
Right.
because then I felt I was being suppressed, I was being dismissed. Today, I understand that now it's about changing the story, it's about finding a new way.
Right.
So
So
that's why both sides are very important.
for sure. And since you did disclose being a complex trauma survivor, if I may ask, what do you see the role yoga being in trauma healing? Because I mean, is it enough to just practice yoga, or should it be done in concert with therapy or other forms of healing? Just anything you want to say further about that, I'd be curious to hear.
Yeah. See, when I started the journey of yoga in the US for myself, it's because I reached a very low point,
Hmm.
very, very low point in my life. And for me, I was so stuck in my own ways, I didn't know what else to do. So I Googled yoga, something came up, and I thought that was the place to go. But what yoga did for me, it revealed to me how much was not healed.
Mm.
So I saw it as the way it started my journey towards healing. It wasn't necessarily the answer at the time, but it was the means to actually go into the path of healing.
Right.
And what has worked for me is, one thing I've come to understand is healing doesn't happen at once. It happens at many different stages, in many different waves, in many different forms. And healing has to be a holistic approach.
Hmm.
So you have to take care of the mind, you have to take care of the body, you have to take care of your soul, you have to take care of all aspects of your being. You have to be heard. And then there has to be a willingness to shift the story, because even the attachment to the story can keep you stuck
Yes.
in those events.
Hmm.
So, for me personally, I had to be heard. When I felt I was adequately heard, then automatically there was a knowing inside that guided me to the next step, which was, how do I integrate what I've been through?
Right.
Once I was able to go through those steps, then I started actually having a desire to move from surviving to thriving. And then yoga has come into each of those different stages in different ways.
Hmm.
So I don't think yoga is the only answer. I
Right.
think in the modern world, it's actually impossible for it to be the only way. I think for someone who's truly been through complex trauma may understand that you have to approach it from all aspects. You need all sorts of support. And then eventually you have to take care of yourself. And sometimes you need more support than other times. Even today, when I am taking the support of yoga the more than therapy, I still feel I need to be heard at times. I still feel sometimes I need to have my mini tantrums. I still feel triggers come up,
Hmm.
and but every time I'm more adequate to deal with them.
Yeah. If I can just ask a question, thank you for that, Malika. Kind of looking at maybe a comparison of our experiences. So, myself as someone white, grew up in the West under a lot of kind of toxic Christianity. One of my kind of barriers to practicing yoga for a lot of years were all the things that like I was told about yoga and how it was like dangerous and Eastern and not Christian and all of that. And then once I eventually kind of got through that, what I was able to find in the practices of yoga was something that really helped me connect with myself, get to the heart of the divine in a way that didn't have like the trappings of a lot of how Christianity had abused me, if I could be quite frank. And so for me, I think there was an element of seeing a lot of these same universal teachings in a different light was
Exactly.
very helpful to me. I'm wondering for you, though, as somebody who grew up in India, who was exposed to yoga, at least in some way, exposed to maybe a lot of the spiritual teachings that we sometimes talk about in yoga. For you, was it more of a reconnection to that, having found yoga in the West, or was it also something that felt like totally new at the time you needed it?
You know, I think it's hard to talk about yoga without talking about the Indian culture,
It's
because
so.
it's so built into our culture that we don't even recognize it as something separate.
Right.
So there are teachings like, even things as simple as the world is one, Vasudevaya Kutumbakam, right? It's so embedded in our hospitality, in our family systems, that we don't think of it as something separate and something different. Moving to the US felt very isolating because there's too much focus on being an individual and you don't have the family support the way you have it in India.
Mhm.
Um, on the other hand, in the Western world, there's a lot of luxury to look after yourself, whereas in India, you're so constantly trying to survive that you can barely take care of your personal needs. Now, I by no standards represent the average Indian when it comes to healing, because I had opportunities that a lot of people don't even have here. People are not even aware that they have trauma. So, when it comes to reconnecting with culture, I think for me, it was not so much about connecting to the teachings of yoga as much as it was connecting to the culture of India, because a
Mm.
lot of those teachings are built into the culture. And I think that's why we also take it for granted. Um, as you were discussing in Christianity, there's sometimes the element of suppression because it's still in very authoritative system where they have the Gurukul system where it's the guru and the shishya, and sometimes it doesn't apply to a lot of us modern people.
Mhm.
But what I also think is it's only a problem if we feel disempowered. If you feel empowered yourself, then you can see it as something happening outside of you.
Mhm.
So recently, when I started my training, they requested us that when the teacher enters the room, everyone stand up and fold your hands and bow to the teacher. I remember feeling immediately triggered by it. But then because I thought like I'm being told what to do.
Mhm.
But then I reframed it as, in my mind, as what if I see it as an invitation to come into someone's space, you know following their rules. It's not so much as being suppressed, but you're kind of honoring the space. When you reframe it, then you feel more empowered and you don't feel as you're being suppressed. So I think fortunately in the modern world there's enough distance where part of the healing process is to realize we have that choice,
Right.
and we don't have to fall into the trap of what is being asked of us.
Right.
That everyone has a choice to step away and take what works for you and send back what doesn't.
Thank you. So well expressed.
Thank you.
So the next kind of big area of discussion piggybacks off of something you said, which is kind of yoga, and I'm paraphrasing, is kind of so embedded into the culture of India. So, I know and I'll speak from my own experience first, that having been exposed to yoga first through more of a secular Western setting, and granted, it was a Kripalu teacher who was my first teacher. Like, she had a genuine training in the Kripalu tradition, and I felt she was able to present it to me in a way that was accessible to, like, as like an American therapist who was still recovering from her Christian journey and needed a little bit more of that mind body connection. But as my practice evolved over the years, I really felt this draw to go to India, to study with actual Indian teachers. And when I did that, I felt like it just blasted my practice right open. But I think then the question comes up for Westerners who have learned yoga, let's say in secular settings here. I'm trying to think the best way to ask this. So if it comes out choppy, we can always kind
Yeah,
of break it down. Is it possible to practice yoga without acknowledging India? Is it possible to practice yoga in the West without practicing that connection to where it came from?
I think personally you have to ask yourself why you're practicing.
Yeah,
You know, there's the whole concept of cultural appreciation versus
right,
appropriation.
right.
So If you want to just practice for yourself, of course you can practice it without acknowledging where it came from.
Mm.
But then you can also realize it will only take you as so deep so far, because there's so much to be learned. Like, as an Indian myself, who I consider, I have just discovered the surface,
Mm.
I'm yet to scratch it. So
Mhm.
imagine, I'm still in the process of realizing that the more I know, the more I realize how little I know. And there's so much to be learned that you have to decide for yourself, is there a need to push it away? Is there a need to embrace it? And are you doing it for yourself? Because it's really, again, what's the intention behind it? And I think the more you want to go deeper, the more automatically you'll want to learn more. So I don't think one has to decide whether you
Right.
need to embrace it or not.
So let me give
It's a choice that happens automatically.
well taken, because I mean, at least that's what happened for me. You know,
Exactly.
what you're describing there and what happened for several other people I know. So keeping it very real, or just like, I shouldn't say very real, but just a very practical example here, like as Western therapists who practice yoga, or someone like me who teaches EMDR and weaves in a lot of yoga and mindfulness content, I've become clearer when I teach it to tell my students, this is how the practices have impacted me. This is where they come from. Let's give credit where credit's due. But then the question that naturally comes up is, would that alienate a potential client who maybe is coming from a very American Christian perspective? Because I tell my students all the time, you don't have to start talking about Hindu gods. You don't have to use Sanskrit. But my
Mhm.
hope would be that you, as the one sharing the practice, would have some kind of connection to where
Mhm.
that's coming from. I don't know if any of that's making sense, but I guess where the essential
Yeah.
question there is, what would you like us to know as Western people who may be sharing yoga practices with students or with clients?
See, I don't think there needs to be any hard and fast rule. I
Yeah.
think if there's a client who's just stepping into it, and if the client just needs to be heard, then that's probably the most appropriate thing. Then there will come a point where you guide them into the next step and then the next step, right? What I would say is, if you're going to use Sanskrit words, if you're going to use Hindu gods, if you're going to use anything yogic from India, then it's better to use it appropriately
Mhm.
than not use it at all.
Yeah.
So, if you're not going to use it, that's perfectly fine. But if you decide to use it, then take the time to research what it means. What benefit does it have to even use that?
Right.
If it's coming naturally to you, then it's part of your practice. If it's something you're willing to share with someone else, then remember, you are their first point of entry into anything yoga.
Right.
So you also hold that responsibility of bringing them the right thing.
Mhm.
Because a lot of the times I've heard pronunciations in the West that are completely butchered. Sometimes I don't even know what people are saying.
Right.
And as an Indian, I'm thinking to myself, oftentimes I'm the Indian sitting in the group where no one's even trying to ask me what is the actual pronunciation. And
I've
to
been with
me,
you when this has happened. Yes.
yeah, and to me, this is a form of entitlement. It's almost like people have taken the Eastern culture, made it their own, and decided that this is the way it's supposed to be.
Mhm.
And I'm not personally offended, but I think it's actually funny. I
Mhm.
can see as a culture how we might feel offended by this because it's not necessary.
Mhm.
I think the more humbling thing, which is really the practice of yoga, is to remain humble, is to ask that, I'm saying it this way, is this appropriate? And is there a different way to say it? Because if you're learning from a Western person and they're teaching you the wrong thing, then that's what's going to be passed down
Right.
from teacher to teacher. So I think you don't have to use Sanskrit words, you don't have to use Hindu gods, but if you are going to use it, take the time to learn the right pronunciation, the right meanings, because they're actually very powerful.
Yes.
Sanskrit words are all vibrations and they're extremely powerful. And I've also seen that people who take the effort to learn it can get the right pronunciation. So I've often seen Western people also make the excuse that it's just not part of the way we pronounce things. that becomes an excuse more than taking the effort to learn.
Right. So, a, a, a very specific example on that, and I learned this from you because I heard it and asked and wanted to clarify. So, is it asana or asan? Is it Virabhadrasana or Virabhadrasan? Is it Ganesh or Ganesha? Because I've heard the A or without it
Yeah.
in a lot of the words.
I think the A is more when you're converting from Sanskrit to English, they often put the A at the end. So that pronunciation isn't so different. Like that's quite okay, like Ganesh or Ganesha. But I think another one that comes to mind is sometimes I've heard Shambho as opposed to Shambho. And Shambho is Lord Shiva. So imagine to Lord Shiva, you're going Shambho, Shambho. And
Mhm.
as an Indian, I first time I heard it, I was like, what are people saying? I didn't even know what they were saying. So it was funny. Another thing that comes to mind is stories.
Mm,
Indian scriptures are full of beautiful stories that have many, many deep meanings. And sometimes when even in the West, forget just Western people, but anyone who doesn't take the effort to learn the story and the meanings behind them, then I don't feel you're sharing all of what it has to offer.
right.
And that's just it. So I think it takes just a little bit of effort to learn,
Mhm.
um, and share. That's it.
Yeah. And something yes, 100%, because I mean, our time's running a little low. But I will just share from Malika. I've learned, like, in some of the stories, like the Hanuman story, just one or two different elements that I wasn't hearing because
Mhm.
Malika was able to give me a little bit more cultural reflection on it. And I thought that was just beautiful. So, yeah, I definitely resonate with what's being shared here, which is take the time to learn. A question that comes up a lot, though, when we talk about cultural humility, cultural appropriateness, cultural appreciation, though, is, Malika, like, should we automatically assume, though, that an Indian person is like willing to be the cultural informant? Because as we've had discussions about other elements of race relations, I've heard very clearly from my black friends, don't just assume you could come up and ask me these hard questions. I may not have the bandwidth to go there. It may not be appropriate for the context, but if I am willing, I am open to answer questions, I'll tell you. So I guess I would ask that same question, like, should we assume that, like, oh, you're Indian, you would know, you'll be willing to have this conversation? Help me feel out some of the dynamics around that.
Yeah, I don't think any assumptions are anytime good, but you can always have the choice to ask,
Sure.
right? I mean, there are many things I don't know, which I often say, "Oh, I'm going to have to Google that."
Okay.
But I don't say just because I'm the person in the room, you should ask me. That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
I'm saying in general, it's good to keep an open mind,
Mm-hmm.
to go and take the time to learn wherever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
And I will tell you, even as someone who is from India, I'm still learning. So there are many concepts that I've learned in the West that I'm relearning now in the East, relearning back home. And I don't think I've learned anything wrong, but I'm certainly going deeper in the understanding in a lot of those things.
Sure. And I think that's beautiful, and something you had shared in the last pass. There's just so much gold here. I'm going to listen and re-listen and mind this. That even people who are Indian can pass down stories incorrectly or without
Absolutely.
nuance. And even a Japanese teacher that I've been studying with recently has said, and I don't know what your feelings are on this, so I guess I'll ask you. He said there's nothing magical about going to Japan to study. There's nothing magical about going to India to study, that you can really access the teachings wherever you're at. So I don't know if you
I
would.
think today with Zoom, that is definitely the case. I think today, even I'm doing my teacher training sitting in my house in New Delhi with the teacher who's sitting many, many, many miles away with students from all over the country.
Mhm.
So I think that's completely the case more than ever. And I'm still planning on doing some more trainings in the US because I feel there's a lot of the modern applications that are more well defined in the US than there are in India. At least I haven't found, doesn't mean they don't exist. So for me, it's never about it's west or east. It's about both places have lots to offer.
Mm.
And a lot depends on where you are on your personal journey.
So well
And
put.
feel the guidance of where you're being called to study, with whom you're being called to study. If something doesn't feel right and doesn't feel aligned, question it. Go seek some other place. Don't get stuck just because someone's guided you into one place.
Yeah.
And I think the whole point of yoga is you get attuned to that alignment. You start feeling it within yourself.
Yes. I yes. I have nothing else to say about that. You said it so well. So I guess my final actual question, and then we'll talk a little bit about the collection and the charity here that we're supporting with
Mm.
the interview today. So if you had any parting words, like you have a platform here, you have a microphone, to share anything with either white Western yoga practitioners, white Western yoga teachers, is there anything else you'd like to say to us? Either something you'd like us to know, something you wish we would do differently? The floor is yours.
I can't say anyone should do anything differently because they're at the right place at the right time right now. This is where you're meant to be. This is your karma, right? Um, I think if we can remember that because of these online platforms, the world is shrinking even faster, really the world is your oyster. So
Yes.
there's no need to think of it as east or west anymore.
Mm,
Think of it as you have access to everything.
yeah.
And let the curiosity get the better of you. Go out and seek and search and learn and fail and be successful in everything, because it's easier today more than ever.
Thank you. So, how we're because I'm sure this interview will be watched for years to come, but right now we're recording it in May 2021, as there's been another major spike in COVID cases in India. So, Malika, tell us as much as you're willing to share. How is India right now? How are you doing? Your family? Anything?
Mm. So this year, right now, it's scary. I have lots of relatives, lots of friends around, lots of people in my colony where I live that have tested positive. Every day we're hearing of people who are passing away. Just yesterday, we heard of two of my mom's colleagues who passed away. So this is a reality. It's happening. There's lots of complications of COVID, and then the news is actually quite depressing because we keep hearing of, like, just day before yesterday in Goa, 13 people died because they didn't have enough oxygen. Now that's what's being heard on the news. What's also happening is a lot of people have lost their jobs
Mm,
because of the curfews, because of the lockdowns. So, what we started doing in my family is we know a lot of people around us who are unemployed, who need medical attention, who just need to eat, and who've been reaching out to my family for support. And because of the curfews and lockdowns, my family hasn't been working. So, we've also reached a point where we can only help so much.
mhm,
And I know lots and lots of very kind hearted people in the US who have been looking for avenues to help. So I thought, why not just bring it all together? So I facilitate yoga nidra sessions. So I decided let's do some donation based yoga nidras where we can create a platform for people to donate, where that money would directly go to people that we are aware of who are in need of money. And so that was the genesis of this collection.
great. So I will be posting a link to this collection in the notes, both wherever this interview appears on Facebook, on YouTube. And we ask, I personally made a plea a few weeks ago that if you are a yoga practitioner or a teacher of some kind, please, with whatever you're able to, support India in some way right now. And I would offer that same encouragement right now. And I think what you've organized, Malika, is a good way for people to contribute, especially if you found, I'll just say, Malika's sharing and what we did in this interview today useful to your own development. Please consider
And I
donating.
think, if I may add, equally as important is to stay in your own practice. If you can find a way to take time to balance yourself, you're welcome to join the Yoga Nidras as well, because that's equally important that you are of sane mind in this chaotic environment. And I know personally this has given me an anchor because whenever we switch on the news, whenever we hear about people that are struggling, it's actually quite depressing. Last year, when this whole thing started, I wasn't as affected by it personally. This time, I feel quite affected by it.
Sure.
So this is a way of staying grounded, being in the practice, which is, if you can contribute financially, that's great, but it's not a requirement. Equally important is to take care of yourself, be responsible. That's what I feel.
Thank you, my friend. And thank you for giving me that reminder today and for sharing that teaching with anybody who's listening now or may listen in the future. So, Malika, how can people be in touch with you if they're interested in your classes, workshops, the Saturday Yoga Nidras you're doing? What's the easiest way for people to find those?
I have a website, malikarajan.com with one L. You might have to put that in writing somewhere.
I will. I'll put it in the liner
Yeah.
notes wherever the interview.
I'll make sure to add this on my website.
Wonderful. Thank you. Namaste.
Namaste.
Love you, my friend.